Hi, I'm Maria Theoharis or Velo Sews on social media. Welcome back to Sew Organised Style podcast featuring textile artists with the upcoming Making Zen Online Retreat from the 27th of May to the 31st of May. Grab a cuppa and relax with us.
I was playing a lot with felted wool sweaters and cutting them up and sewing them into things. And then that just kind of led to my first book, Warm Fuzzies.
Betz White is the textile artist you just heard. She's one of the 20 textile artists on the Making Zen Online Retreat. As Kate Ward said, she selected tutors for the retreat who are textile artists. We get to learn one skill from them, but we certainly get an inside look into how textile artists put their whole selves into their works. Let's listen to Betz now. Thanks for coming on to the podcast of the Making Zen Online Retreat. I'm really glad that you're here.
Well, thanks for having me. It's nice to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you today. Betz, you're one of the 20 textile artists we get to learn from at the upcoming Making Zen Online Retreat next week. I know our listeners are keen to know more about you and how you developed your textile art skills. And I always encourage people to have a look at the social media of all of the tutors so people can find you on Instagram and Betz_White to see what you've done in the past.
Yep, that's my handle. So it's Betz, BETZ _ and then white, like the color.
Can they find you anywhere else on social media or online?
I have a website that's betzwhite.com.
Yep.
And I'd say between my website and Instagram, that's probably the best place to find me and see my work.
Thank you so much. Betz, how did you become a textile artist?
I grew up in a really crafty family. I grew up in the 70s and my mom sewed a lot of our clothes and always had some kind of craft project going on at the kitchen table. And even my dad, he was doing needlepoint at one point. There was one year that he sewed down jackets for everyone in the whole family. We were really into making stuff. And I pretty much felt like that was kind of my superpower that, well, if you wanted something, you just made it. You know, there wasn't really fast fashion or shops that had cheap things that you could buy. It was like if you were interested in something, you pretty much just had to make it. That's kind of how I grew up. And then my grandmother and my mom both knit, and I learned to knit when I was about 6 years old. I've just kind of always been interested in fabric and fiber. And then at my grandmother's urging, I got a degree in fashion design in college. And I ended up working in the apparel industry for about 15 years, designing kids' clothes. Then when my kids were little, in about 2006, I started a blog just because it seemed like a fun thing to do. And I was playing a lot with felted wool sweaters and cutting them up and sewing them into things. And then that just kind of led to my first book, Warm Fuzzies, which came out in 2007, I think. So I kind of just stumbled into my business of starting a website and selling my work and writing books and teaching. And so it's been about 18 years now since then.
So in that time period, how many books have you published now?
I've written 3. So there was Warm Fuzzies, which was all about upcycling wool sweaters, felting them in crafts. And then I wrote Sewing Green, which was kind of evolving into more upcycling and beyond sweaters. That came out, I think, in 2009. And then the last book was called Present Perfect, and that came out, I think, in 2014. It's been a good 10 years since the last book. So I don't know, maybe it's time for another, maybe not.
I think the good part about your describing all 3 books is that upcycling, recycling, using existing materials seems to be a theme of your practice.
Yes, I mean, it's always been something that I'm interested in. And in the early blogging days, I felt like that really resonated with people. And it was super inspiring for me too. It just really got my creative juices flowing. You know, what could this be? What would be a clever way to, transform this into something else? And it just kind of snowballed from there, really, because it was just like a really fun way to look at things. I've always enjoyed that.
It might be seen that recycling and upcycling is something that has been prominent in the last few years, but you've been thinking about that for many, many years.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, even in high school, I used to go to the thrift stores a lot and buy old clothes and cut them and stitch them and do stuff to them. And that was, the word upcycling wasn't a thing then.
No, not at all.
So it was really fun. I think I might have been one of the weird kids in the high school, but I guess that didn't bother me.
You were one of the weird kids with foresight in the future.
That's right. Well, I was a future fashion student, so I had to express myself somehow.
So before we get on to the topic that you're going to be treating us with on the Making Zen online retreat is when you said that your father did sewing and he made the down jackets, can I ask, did he have an engineering background?
Well, I don't think he had an engineering background. He was a plant superintendent for a steel company.
Right. Yeah.
And so he was more of like a manager, I guess you would say. But he was always super handy, with handyman type skills. I guess he just was interested in making other things as well. And the down jackets were like a kit that came with like the bags of the feathers and the fabric and all that. So I think he just enjoyed the process of putting that together. And I don't know, he's just a crafty guy.
That's why it's part of your DNA.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, good. Thank you. For people who are thinking of going to the Making Zen online retreat, what can they look forward to from you?
I'm going to be focusing on embroidery, and I've really enjoyed doing that the last few years. It's kind of made an appearance in my work throughout the years, but I've been coming around to it and focusing more on it recently. And one of the things I've really been enjoying is a chunky style embroidery on knits. So I'm going to be teaching an embroidery on knits class. So that would be kind of reviving an old sweater or an accessory from the thrift store in the back of your closet and using maybe yarns in your stash or some tapestry wool to do some embroidery stitches and embellish things that we have. That's what I'm going to be focusing on. And I have taught some online and also in person. And it's just a class that people are really interested in.
When people look at your Instagram account, they can see some of the really lovely, luscious, and I'd say luscious because of the way the embroidery that you've done on wool looks like, because it's not flat, it's quite raised because of the texture of the yarn.
Right. I think texture and color and dimension has just always been something that's made me gravitate toward fiber art. It is luscious. It's a really good word for it. It's just, I love all that texture and color and the different stitches you can make and, the French knots that are like little bobbles. And it's just really enjoyable. And I think using yarn, you can go bigger in scale and it's a little bit more instant gratification. You can make kind of a big splash with it just because the scale of it. So it is a really fun transformational thing to stitch.
Your work, it has all of that texture and you can really showcase color. And I think it's going to be a really fun one and a real good time for people on the Making Zen online retreat to explore how amazing your workshop will give their embroidery in the future.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's kind of adjacent to the trend in mending as well, especially like the visible mending. I'm not really teaching how to repair a hole per se, but it is something that, if you have a sweater or jumper that's got a stain or a threadbare spot, you can repair it and then you can embroider on top of it. Or if it's a stain, just make a little flower, a little bug or something, and kind of use that to your advantage and a jumping off point for some creative embellishment.
There are a lot of people who do the Making Zen online retreat who take part in visible mending. And, you can use embroidery on a woolen garment or a knit and do the ladybugs or the hearts or the flowers, and it looks quite stunning. And it's just a mend, but it extends the life of the garment.
Right.
Do people need to buy new resources or get new notions to do your workshop for the Making Zen Online Retreat?
Not really. I mean, there might be a couple little tools that could be helpful, but in general, I think as long as you have something to stitch on, you have some yarn to work with, and you have a chenille or a tapestry needle, then you should be good to go, and scissors. Sometimes I teach with using a stabilizer that has the design on it as a guide.
Oh,
But I also like to teach what I call winging it, which is after you've practiced the stitches, you just kind of go for it, because the embroidery is really forgiving. So if you made a flower and it's lopsided, you can totally just take out one of the petals and redo it. It's super forgiving. So I like to encourage people to just kind of like go and not necessarily like have a pattern.
Oh, that's good. I like the fact that you've said that, if something doesn't work out, you can undo it fairly easily. What advice would you give people who are thinking of taking part in the Making Zen Online Retreat?
I would say to give yourself the gift of the retreat and just use it as a time to spark your creativity and find some community, allowing yourself to kind of come from that beginner space. Even if you've done embroidery before, or if you've never touched a needle, I think it's kind of a safe space to just start somewhere and kind of grease the machine of your creativity and get the juices flowing. So yeah, I think it sounds like a really great experience, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
People who have been on the retreat know that the Making Zen Online Retreat provides free access to the 20 textile tutors during that week. The additional benefit of purchasing the VIP ticket is lifetime access to these tutorials from all of the textile artists like yourself. And plus, they can discuss and share what they've done on the Facebook group. And I've seen how the creativity explodes, not just at the
Right.
time of the retreat, but ongoing. So I know that people will, who are thinking of going to the Making Zen Online Retreat will realize it's not just a one-time thing, it's actually ongoing.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad to hear that.
So that sense of community isn't just for that week, it's actually ongoing.
I'm just excited that there's, interest in hand stitching. It's just so therapeutic and fun. Like I said, it can kind of be a little bit of an instant gratification to pick up a needle and thread or yarn and stitch something and refresh something in your closet. And that's just a great feeling. So I'm excited about it.
And it's a simple skill of embroidery, but the creativity, being able to upcycle resources and do it in your own time is one of the joys of going to your workshop on the Making Zen Online Retreat.
Yeah, sounds great.
Betz, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast for the Making Zen Online Retreat. I've had a really eye-opening experience having a look at the work that you have on Instagram.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it was really lovely. All of the colors and the shapes and the way you apply yarn and felt has been an eye-opener. So thank you again for being on the podcast. It's been lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. This episode for the Making Zen Online Retreat on Soul Organized Style podcast was produced by me, Maria Theoharis, with permission of Betz White and Kate Ward. Sound by bensound.com. To register for the Making Zen Online Retreat, there's a link in the show notes, as well as on our podcast page and on our podcast Instagram account. Make sure you book in to the Making Zen Online Retreat using those links. You can subscribe to Soul Organized Style podcast, but with an S, not a Z, on all good podcast apps. Make sure you go back and listen to our free Making Zen podcast archive. And if you can, consider supporting the production of this podcast on Patreon. In the show notes, there's a link so that you can register for the Making Zen Online Retreat. It's free to watch for the first 24 hours of every day from the 27th to the 31st of May. We look forward to joining you in your sewing room next time. Stay safe, everyone.